Hi everyone, my name is Iman Chowdhury, and today I'll be giving a short lesson on a topic related to global change ecology. And the specific topic I'll be discussing is the phenology of plants. So we just have a guide here about what we'll be discussing during this lesson. First, I want to go over the importance of understanding global change ecology. Then we'll move to the definition and importance of plant phenology and some of its critical applications. Then we'll learn how phenology is influenced by climate and what this means for ecosystems. We'll learn about something called phenological mismatches. And finally, we'll discuss how phenology is an indicator of global change impacts. So I want to briefly discuss why it's necessary to understand global change ecology. Drivers of global change affect both ecosystem services and human well-being. So this means that changes in ecosystem services influence all components of human well-being, including the basic material needs for a good life, health, good social relations, security, and as well as freedom of choice and actions. So understanding these processes is important because once an ecosystem has gone through degradation, recovery to the original state might take decades or even centuries and may sometimes be impossible. Also, it's thought that global warming is primarily human-induced, and its impacts are already being seen in transportation, agriculture, health, and water and energy supplies. And what's concerning is that these impacts are only expected to grow with continuing climate change. So, understanding how all of this works can help all of us, as citizens, business leaders, and policymakers, to make informed decisions about how to respond to climate change and all of these impacts. So, in relation to global change, what is plant phenology? Well, you could call it nature's calendar. Phenology refers to the timing of plant life cycle events, such as things like leaf bud burst, flowering, and fruiting. And it's significant because this timing is influenced by variations in climate. So why exactly is plant phenology important? Well, the cascading effects of it are on multiple levels of biological organization, all the way from individuals to ecosystems. So the timing of these key life events are really critical to the important relationships in these ecosystems. So we know that plants are at the base of the food chain. So inherently, this means that anything that affects plants also impacts other parts of the ecosystem. In addition, it can advance our understanding of the drivers of phenological response, and it can provide insight into future states of species distributions. It can also help inform us of adaptive management of natural resources, and in turn, that will help manage biodiversity and ecosystem services. It also plays a role in human agricultural systems. And considering all of this, it's very much a leading indicator of all of the impacts of climate change. So phenology has a lot of critical applications. Like we mentioned earlier, it can maintain diverse habitats by taking management actions that help prepare us for many different potential responses to change. Another interesting application is that it can make predictions of human health-related events. So things like earlier flowering means earlier allergies. It's also important for farmers in that it can help with optimization of when to plant, fertilize, and harvest crops. It's also important in understanding the timing of ecosystem processes because it does influence things like carbon cycling and also ecosystem services like pollination. So how is phenology influenced by climate? Well, as temperatures warm and precipitation patterns change, a lot of species are advancing their phenological events. So we can see that many spring events are occurring earlier, and fall events are also happening later. Some cases of this are plants are putting out their leaves earlier, and we're also seeing earlier spring flowering. So what does all of this mean for ecosystems? Well, phenology affects the overall fitness of organisms that depend on plants. And of course, in terrestrial ecosystems, this basically means all animals. And these changes have been observed over a long period of time, for many decades, and also across different habitat types. And what's important is that changes in plant phenology can have a negative impact on demography. And because these demographic changes are occurring so rapidly, it can also result in rapid evolutionary shifts. Another result is something called phenological mismatches. So not all species are changing at the same rate or direction. What I mean by this is that there are many ecological relationships in a community that are synchronized. So some of the species in these relationships are advancing their phenological events, but some of them aren't. So this is called a phenological mismatch, and it's really leads to a desynchronization of these relationships between species. And studies have found that species higher in the food chain, such as birds, have advanced their phenology less than species lower in the food chain, like plants and insects. So that kind of shows how the mismatch is happening. These mismatches can be seen in the example of migratory birds. So bird migration, breeding, and nesting are all timed every spring to coincide with the peak availability of resources like insects. And this creates a synchronized relationship. And the synchrony between birds and key resources is helpful to ensure that birds survive migration and can also successfully reproduce. So what's concerning is that this type of phenological mismatch could have serious demographic consequences, and it could ultimately cause a decline in population levels. So what does all of this mean, and how does it indicate global change impacts? Well, changes in phenological events are among the most sensitive biological responses to climate change. One example is earlier springs. Earlier springs reflect the accumulation of heat sufficient to initiate things like leafing and flowering in temperature-sensitive plants. So it can help us understand the relationship between climatic changes and shifts in ecosystem productivity and the implications for things like global carbon cycling. So all of this data can help us assess the vulnerability of species, how their populations will change, whether they'll shrink or keep growing, and looking at how these ecological communities respond to ongoing climate change can help us really understand how global change is occurring. So the main takeaway from this lesson is that plant phenology is greatly influenced by climate change. So shifts in phenology can have a negative impact on all of the organisms that depend on plants. And like I said, because phenological events are so sensitive to climate change, studying all of these effects can really help us assess the full impacts of global change. So here's just all of my resources that I used, and that is the end of my short lesson. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed it.